Hello, everyone. I'm Eric Bolling, and this is a Fox News alert. We're keeping a very close eye on a deadly shooting at a courthouse in St. Joseph, Michigan this afternoon. 2 bailiffs have been killed, and 1 deputy sheriff and a civilian have been shot. The suspect is dead. State police have secured the scene. We're going to bring you more as soon as developments come in. But we now turn to the tensions involving recent police shootings in America. Former Philadelphia Police Commissioner Charles Ramsey warns the country is in a very volatile state.
We are sitting on a powder keg. I mean, it's you can call it a powder keg. You could say that we're handling nitroglycerin. But obviously, when you just look at what's going on, we're in a very, very critical point in the history of this country. And I think you've got 2 conventions coming up that are going to be very, very challenging to handle. And I don't think they're going to go without some incident taking place. It's unfortunate, but that's what I personally think.
And Dallas Police Chief David Brown has an interesting solution how to make things better. Here's what his message to Black Lives Matter protesters was earlier.
I'm the kind of person that I probably wouldn't protest or complain. I'd get involved and do something about it by becoming part of the solution. Serve your communities. Don't be a part of the problem. We're hiring. We're hiring. Get off that protest line and put an application in. And we'll put you in your neighborhood, and we will help you resolve some of the problems you're protesting about.
Great message, Greg. Get out and help out. Don't complain.
I think it's a great message. The only challenge is can the folks that he's talking to match the application requirements? They might have to change that. They might, like for example, if you have a certain thing in your background that might keep you from becoming a police officer, you might have to change that. But I want to address the powder keg question. If that's indeed real, if we are living on a powder keg, and why? And I think it's because it's based on leisure. I think we have a bored society. If you look over the long term, violence is going down. We've become generally more peaceful. The necessities of life have been met. You have a cell phone, you have TVs, you have cheap food, nice clothes, you have easy relationships. So what's next? Faced with the challenges of leisure, you turn to conflict instead of contemplation because you don't know what else to do. If people from other countries like Rwanda or Somalia came here and saw what we were protesting, there would be, are you out of your mind? I would give, like, to have 1/10 of what you have. But we've got so much.
KG, we talked about it. We very briefly touched on it at the beginning of the show. Another shooting in Michigan. 2 bailiffs are killed. Are we dealing with some sort of national epidemic?
You know, I hesitate to call it that, but obviously, like he said, you know, Ramsey said, there's tensions are high. Things are very volatile right now. We're dealing with, you know, a country that is in flux. We are dealing with a country that has had a tremendous amount of vitriol and incendiary rhetoric, blaming, castigating the police department, which, you know, I totally oppose, and it's very sad to see now officers to have a target on their back, because believe me, the majority of the people, you know, in this country appreciate that you protect and serve and you help make that our communities safe. You know, having worked for years as a prosecutor in, you know, very serious cases including death penalty, obviously security in the courtroom is of paramount concern, and you have individuals that sometimes like this think they have nothing to lose and try to pull a weapon off of an officer and one of the courtroom deputies, like we saw happen here. And it's just, you know, my heart goes out to the families and to the victims in this.
Dana, do you think this is copycat? Is this I don't know, a movement that's happening to kill cops?
And it's probably something that when you look back over time, you could say hindsight is 20/20, and either it was or wasn't coordinated. I think it's just a little bit too early to say. And it's the heat of summer, and people have leisure time. Right, so I think there's that, but I also think that something that David French of National Review wrote today was really interesting, and of course I'd love everybody's thoughts, and Juan's in particular, about the grievances that Black Lives Matter are concerned about are real to them, and some of them I think are legitimate questions that society has to deal with. But within the element of BLM, you have this radicalized or extremist type of violence that is basically coloring the entire movement as to be something that maybe it perhaps didn't intend to be initially. And I don't know at this point, how do they separate those two things out? Because the attacks on cops obviously is very highly charged. And then you see somebody like the police chief, David Brown of Dallas. I'm so glad that America has had a chance to meet somebody like that. I mean, what a leader at a time when we really could use one.
Go on.
Well, I just think it's very important to understand the, the impression that was left by the social media of last week before the Dallas shootings, the shootings of those two black men, one in Baton Rouge and the other in Minnesota. I think that spread in the social media environment like a wildfire. And so, to my mind, Black Lives Matter had actually been in decline, especially after the politics. Remember, they tried to, confront Hillary Clinton, shush Bernie Sanders and all the rest, and it really had not amounted to much. You didn't have support for them coming from the Congressional Black Caucus. You did not have support from them in terms of local officials or even President Obama. But now you have people who are back on their heels in the aftermath of the Dallas shooting, people who feel on the defensive as if their issue is being obscured, and they feel like, well, gee, we understand, they don't feel responsible for the one maniac. We always have extremists and maniacs in any movement, but they don't feel responsible for the man who pulled the trigger and perpetrated those horrific acts in Dallas.
We're going to talk about President Obama right now, but he, before he knew any of the evidence, before he knew any of the circumstances regarding the two incidences you're talking about, Minnesota and Baton Rouge, he took to the podium and basically said, hey, this has to stop. He didn't know what had to stop yet, but he went ahead and did that. I'm not sure that didn't charge up the Black Lives Matter.
That's not a responsible statement to make. You say the president, he didn't know. What he knew was that there are people in our society, and this is what I think you're not picking up on, there are people in our society who feel they do not have equal treatment from the police. So you could say you're wrong, but you have to point it out to them. You have to make sure that the society is listening and responding.
All I was saying is he should have, in my opinion, he should have waited to find out what the facts of the case were, and then if it were as it appears or as he thought it was, then go ahead, go hard. But my problem is the timing. 2 hours after he goes to the podium, 5 cops are dead.
Oh, come on, gosh. Now, that association is out of line. Come on, Eric. That's really too much.
For it, but the shooters clearly said he used the Black Lives Matter protest to speed up whatever he was planning on doing.
No. We don't know what. First of all, what we know is that he had amassed a lot of ammunition and explosives.
Right. He was going to do something, no doubt.
And so you had these incidents take place in Louisiana and Minnesota, and then you have a peaceful march. Everybody says it was a peaceful march, and he takes advantage of that moment. Why do you want to blame Black Lives Matter?
Let's talk about this. President Obama spent the weekend overseas defending the Black Lives Matter movement. Listen to the other movements he compares BLM to.
The abolition movement was contentious. The effort for women to get the right to vote was contentious and messy. The same was true with the civil rights movement and the union movement and the environmental movement and the anti-war movement during Vietnam. And I think what you're seeing now is part of that long-standing tradition.
Now, let's bring it around this way. I want to hear what you have to say, but let's start with Kimberly. The women's right to vote, civil rights movement, abolition, anti-war, and BLM, all on equal footing.
Yeah, I mean, he just seems so out of touch. It's, to me, that's such irresponsible rhetoric. I don't think there's any fair comparison between those movements that he said, like women trying to fight for the right to vote and Black Lives Matter, and people that support Black Lives Matter calling for the death of police officers, to kill cops, like the guy that supported them that, committed these heinous, cold-blooded murders of officers in Dallas. Just like the shooting in Michigan, horrible situations that we see happening now against law enforcement. And, unfortunately, the DNA of Black Lives Matter is associated with this.
Juan, do you put Black Lives Matter on the same level that President Obama does on the women's right to vote, the civil rights movement, the abolition movement?
Yeah, what you're seeing is contentious movements, beginning with the American Revolution. I mean, remember, we didn't like the idea the British military and their guns were coming in and telling us what to do, imposing taxes and even staying in our houses without our, without our volition. So we fought back. And I think what you see is in all these cases, you have people who say, oh, there are extremists among you involved in the movement, so therefore you're responsible for the very worst elements. And those are people who really don't want to change, don't want to hear the grievance.
Dana, your thoughts on that equal footing for them?
I think that whether I agree with President Obama or not, I think that it's incumbent upon all of us to recognize there are a lot of people in America who do agree with him. So then you have to decide, okay, well then from a leadership standpoint, what do we need to do? I actually think it's kind of an evolution or a continuation of a movement, and that these things sort of ebb and flow over time, and that it's built up over a feeling by African Americans that they are unfairly targeted by police. And there's a study in the New York Times that's reported today by somebody from Harvard who had gone, he's like, let's look at the evidence. And the lethality argument is actually not there. It does not hold up. But again, from social media and the perception, President Obama is giving voice to people that he thinks have a grievance, and he's trying to find a way, I guess, to channel it. I don't necessarily agree with it, but I think we have to recognize that there are a lot of people who do feel that way.
Legitimate protest group should be recognized?
Well, this is the topic of my monologue in the next segment, so I'm like, I'm trying to think of something other than what I'm going to say next. I will say this. If you took a civil rights movement, or the women, if you actually took a time travel machine and brought them forward and saw some of the grievances, I'm not talking Black Lives Matter, but all the progressive movement grievances on the campuses, the cry for safe spaces, their heads would explode. Any civil rights activists from the 60s, if they went onto Harvard campuses and saw that they were divesting over coal, you know, or that they were saying climate change causes terror, every common sense civil rights leader or hero or women's right would go like, I can't believe you guys, you're making a mockery of everything we fought for.
All right, let's take a listen quickly to Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton on this exact topic. Listen.
I want our nation's police to know that we thank you from the bottom of our heart. America's police and law enforcement personnel are what separates civilization from total chaos and the destruction of our country as we know it. It's time for our hostility against our police and against all members of law enforcement to end, and end immediately, right now. I am the law and order candidate.
I will call for white people like myself to put ourselves in the shoes of those African American families who fear every time their children go somewhere. I'm going to be talking to white people. I think we're the ones who have to start listening to the legitimate cries that are coming from our African American fellow citizens.
Dan, you want to go?
No, I was just almost throwing up listening to her, but go ahead.
Yeah. Well, I think that this is your choice, America. And the important thing in an election is where you can draw a contrast between two candidates and the approach and how. So there you have it. There are two distinct choices. What I think is very interesting is that whoever wins out of those two, they are going to have to deal with this problem. And how they decide to deal with it will be really important for all of our futures.
Final thoughts.
We were talking about this on Friday. The idea that, like, how these huge conflicts, these horrible events, we experience them, yes, and then we completely move on to another one. And I keep going back to the point that I made on Friday, that since Sunday has become another Saturday, there is no period to the end of our sentences. So we don't actually end the week contemplating what happened Monday through Friday when a community comes together at church and they sit and they talk about it and they de-escalate the emotions and they start talking about the facts. But we don't have that period anymore, so the sentence keeps going on and on and on. So no one ever actually comes to any conclusions. They just get angrier.
It's a run-on sentence.
Yes.
And I think that Trump really nailed it there in terms of his messaging and getting out a message to people to say, I am the law and order candidate. That's what people want to hear right now, that you're going to restore order, you're going to restore public safety, because people feel unsafe in America because the people that are supposed to be protecting us are now under siege.
Quick thought. Hillary has a different approach. Let's talk to white people.
Let's talk to everybody. I mean, what we need is healing. I don't think we need that kind of incendiary rhetoric, and I would particularly, I mean, to me, it's incredible. You know, Trump has engaged in bigoted language, xenophobia. He's put down women in a really execrable way. No. And I'm just, listen, we're all for law and order here. Nobody's for anarchy. Let's just be clear. So, but this is a false divide, and the reality is people want to ignore what Trump has been running on.
All right, we got to leave it right there at 9 p.m. Eastern.